Christopher Columbus set foot on the soil of the New World for the very first time, he wasn't in America. He first discovered the Caribbean islands with their unique flora and fauna. Today, the adventure of experiencing the fascinating nature of the Caribbean islands is no longer the privilege of brave discoverers. Tourists who are looking for more than hot rhythms and cool drinks in their Caribbean holidays will find a unique nature experience in the damp rainforests of the islands. Unfortunately, Columbus's descendants have left only meager remnants of the primeval forests formerly covering the islands. Already a large number of plant and animal species have become extinct. He who's lucky enough to encounter one of the large herbivorous iguanas, which are up to 5 feet long, cannot help being reminded of the era of the dinosaurs. 8 different species of iguanas live on the Caribbean islands. On these seemingly endless beaches, for thousands of years, female iguanas have been burying their eggs in the warm sand so that the tropical sun could do the brooding for them. But that was before Columbus entered the scene. Today, nearly all species of Caribbean iguanas have become extremely rare. Some are on the brink of extinction right now. Coconut palms are growing everywhere in the tropics around the globe. Their fruits, the coconuts, are distributed worldwide by tidal currents. It's most likely that the iguanas have reached the Caribbean islands from their origin on the Central American mainland in a similar manner, by clinging onto driftwood, for example. Isolated on the different islands, the original iguana, in the course of millennia, developed into separate species. The Jamaican iguana, the Cayman iguana, and here on Hispaniola it's the rhinoceros iguana, which lives only here and nowhere else in the world. Animal species which are bound to a specific environment are exceptionally prone to extinction, especially when this environment, which has been untouched wilderness for hundreds of thousands of years, has been destroyed in a few hundred years by modern civilization. Jamaica. This Caribbean island was discovered in 1494 by Columbus on his second voyage to the Americas. At that time, the only human inhabitants of the island were the Arawaks. Today, the Jamaican population consists solely of the descendants of the European conquerors and their black slaves. None of the Arawak Indians survived the time of colonization. They were exterminated by the Spanish conquistadores. And here, where today coconuts are being offered by street vendors, even in the last century, iguanas were on sale. Killed by the hundreds, they were the cheapest meat supply on the Jamaican markets. The naturalist, Sir Hans Solana, wrote in his travel report from 1725, "Iguanas have a very good and fat meat, just like land crabs. They came in very useful when the English occupied the island. They were sold regularly on the public market by the first settlers for ½ a crown apiece. Iguanas are very common on Jamaica, and they are still eaten today." This was nearly 300 years ago. But in the beginning of this century, there were only a few Jamaican iguanas left. They survived in this strange dry jungle where the trees grow on porous limestone instead of damp soil. The Hellshare Hills, a deserted area, a tropical forest where every raindrop is sucked up immediately by the sun-baked limestone. There's no layer of humus which would be capable of storing water and nutrients. This dry limestone forest is the home of many plant and animal species that have adapted well to the extreme climatic conditions. For this yellow snake and many other plant and animal species, the forests of Jamaica are the sole living space on our planet. One of these endemic species is the night-active Jamaican coney. This Caribbean rodent is, besides an already extinct mouse species and a few bats, the only mammal that originally existed on Jamaica. Another mammal living in the wild in Jamaica today is the Indian mongoose. The mongoose was introduced at the end of the last century in the hope that it would kill off the unintentionally imported rats. These agile animals dispersed quickly all over the island, but they not only preyed on rats. Besides eating snakes, they nourished on iguana eggs and easy-to-catch iguana hatchlings. The ecological equilibrium of the tropical forests in the Caribbean islands is persistently damaged even when, at first sight, the lush green looks like the ideal of intact nature. By 1942, there were only a handful of the formerly abundant iguanas left on Goat Island, a small island off the south coast of Jamaica. Recollections of the last attempt to save the Jamaican iguanas.
We had our doubts about Goat Island because, of course, fishermen go out there, and some dogs would be there. And then there was an American base, I understand, at Great Goat Island during the Second World War. And all these factors combined to make people here at the Institute rather worried about what would happen to the population of iguanas on Great Goat Island. So they thought the best thing to do was to capture some, bring them to the zoo here in Kingston, and try to keep them alive and have them breed. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. The Goat Island iguanas died out.
The Jamaica Institute. In the cellar, Tom Farr shows us the sad remains of a species that had its place in the global ecosystem for more than 100,000 years. Captured on Goat Island in 1940, died in captivity in June 1942. Unemotional and scientifically correct. The last Jamaican iguanas in alcohol. A warning, evidence of the destroying nature of what we proudly call civilization. A civilization which not only Jamaica but all over the world takes it for granted that animal species are exterminated in the name of progress and prosperity. A civilization that even has the bad taste to adorn its destructive acts with the names of the extirpated species. Iguana Flats is the name of the region in which Jamaica's capital, Kingston, is situated. Iguana Avenue and Iguana Plaza are common street names in Jamaica, and even for the post office, the iguana seems to be still alive. It's only in the dry forests of Jamaica that there is no trace left of the largest native vertebrate. The Hellshare Massif is a dead coral reef lifted out of the sea by the shifting of the Earth's crust. The porous limestone is full of remnants of long-gone forms of life. For science, the Jamaican iguana had vanished from the face of the Earth in 1942. Nevertheless, there were sporadic reports of iguana sightings by the hunters who roamed through this area of about 100 square kilometers in pursuit of wild pigs, pigs that were once domesticated and are now abundant in these forests. The hunters claimed to have seen large living reptiles. These reports found little notice from the scientists. But then in 1970, a pig hunter led a zoologist from Kingston University to a desiccated iguana carcass hanging in a tree. Now, there was substantiated hope that the Jamaican iguana could have survived after all. But the following intensive searches in the area remained unsuccessful. The Jamaican iguana continued to rank as an extinct species. That was until June 1990, when the pig hunter Edwin Dafus penetrated deeper than ever before into the nearly inaccessible forest.
For over 6 weeks, and I've never went that far.
I had been hunting in the Hellshare area for more than 6 weeks. When hunting for pigs, I usually don't go further than 2 miles into the forest. But after 8 weeks, I went deeper and deeper into the core area. I'd never been so far as this on this hunt, but I still had not killed a pig. On my way back, I heard the dogs bark in front of me. Apparently, they were attacking something. When I came closer, I still could not recognize what it was. But it looked like there was an animal in a hollow tree trunk. The dogs were barking at it. I stooped down and I saw a tail. Then I recognized a large reptile. I shooed the dogs away and I pulled the reptile out of the tree trunk. Because of the hungry dogs, I had to hold the reptile over my head. Maybe I was a little frightened, because I thought the animal could bite me. But at the same time, I wanted to know what kind of animal this was. So I put it into a bag and brought it into town.
So at the same time, I said, look, I want to know what it really means to me, so I did not take him out, put him in the bag, and take him to town.
The zoologist at Kingston University realized immediately that this animal was the Jamaican iguana, which was supposed to be extinct. This species, which had not been heard of for 50 years, had obviously survived in this barely passable jungle. Edwin Dafus led the zoologist Dr. Peter Vogel into his pig hunting grounds. In this remote and inaccessible area, into which few men have set foot before, the scientist hoped to learn more about the Jamaican iguana. Conspicuous traces of red soil on the white limestone. On the other Caribbean islands, the known iguana resting sites look very similar. These are places where the iguanas come to bask in the morning sun. And so the zoologist interprets these traces as signs of the presence of iguanas. By studying the other, not yet extinguished iguana species on the neighboring islands, Peter Vogel learnt a lot about their way of living and their behavioral traits. So it's not very difficult for him to make out this retreat of an iguana in this rock hole. In front of the hole, he finds the typical faecial pellets in which the vegetable remains of the iguana's last meal are clearly distinguishable. This burrow has been dug out by an iguana as well. No doubt the Jamaican iguana must be alive and living in the vicinity too. When the scientist discovers an empty eggshell in another burrow, he's certain that this is the right place to wait for the iguana. This simple observation hut, built out of forest materials, is manned around the clock by Peter Vogel and several voluntary helpers. If there's a chance at all of learning something about the iguana, which has been believed to be extinct for half a century now, then it must be here. And then, only a few hours later, there's certainty. The Jamaican iguana is alive. Although approaching the observation hut for up to 25 meters, the iguana shows no signs of shyness towards the scientists. The Jamaican iguana had no need to be afraid of enemies in the hundreds of thousands of years of his evolutionary history. He always was the biggest and strongest animal on Jamaica. The Jamaican iguana is a cold-blooded animal, which means he has to regulate his body temperature by basking in the sun when it's cold and by cooling off in the shade when the heat becomes too great. By these contrast baths, the iguanas try to keep their temperature at a steady level of 40 degrees centigrade. In many aspects, the iguanas are reminiscent of the fire-spitting dragons of fairy tales, or of the dinosaurs which died out some 65 million years ago. Claws like a bird of prey and the wrinkled reptile armor increase this impression, and the comparison is not at all unfounded. When the scientists discovered the first dinosaur skeletons, they were looking for similarities with animals living today. The iguanas are the only animals to which possible relations could be traced. Especially the teeth, which lie covered on the inside of the jaw, show some puzzling parallels. When scientists first discovered the remains of a dinosaur, they scientifically named it Iguanodon, which means as much as iguana tooth. The Caribbean iguanas are the last living links to the long-gone dinosaurs. The iguanas of the Caribbean islands do not only resemble their primeval ancestors from the exterior, some of their inner organs are still in a very primitive state. For example, their digestive tract. In their stomach, which consists of several different chambers, the food is digested by bacteria, nematodes and other microorganisms. This mode of digestion is very ineffective, as can be seen by the only partially digested leaves and fruits found in their droppings. Moreover, the little digestion helpers in their stomach can only function at the correct body temperature. That is why the iguanas have to spend so much time regulating their temperature. But they have lots of time, as they only spend about 1 hour per day on feeding. Because of their slow digestion, every piece of food remains about 4 days in their intestines before it's excreted. Territorial fights are observed frequently, especially between female Jamaican iguanas. They're defending their nesting sites with clutches of up to 20 eggs, which they lay into self-dug burrows. In spite of the rediscovery of the Jamaican iguana, the species is far from being saved. In weeks of observation, 23 animals have been counted. If these 23 iguanas in the Hellshare Hills really are the last survivors of the species, then the day of their final extermination might not be far away. Plans for a large-scale urban development project right here in the Hellshare area are already underway.
These two cities should accommodate, or are planned to accommodate, several 100,000 people. The western city would reach this area here. You look over here, the ridge of this depression here would actually be covered with houses. People would intrude into this area, and certainly the forest would disappear very rapidly.
Only a few kilometers away, you can hear the drone of bulldozers. Before the buildings can be erected, roads have to be cut into the forest. Road construction means jobs, and jobs mean a little prosperity for Jamaica's population, which mostly live on the edge of poverty. Millions of dollars have already been invested into this housing and resort development project in the Hellshare Hills. When the planning started, nobody could foresee that right here, the Jamaican iguana had survived. The protests of scientists and environmentalists who kept warning that the last tropical dry forests were destroyed by the urbanization died away unheard. Where economic interests are concerned, ecological reason isn't worth a penny. This holds true for Jamaica as well as for the rest of the world, so the conditions for the survival of the Jamaican iguana are conceivably severe. In this satellite picture, you can see how the roads cut into the virgin forest like the white tentacles of civilization. For the people don't stay on the roads. From there, they penetrate into the forest. The timber from these clearings is burned into charcoal. This is not the ruinous exploitation of tropical lumber to satisfy Euro-American luxury desires that takes place in other third-world countries. No, these forests are cut to provide the necessary fuel for the poorest of the population. How can you explain to these people that their work is threatening the survival of an iguana species. And the greatest threat, which brought the Jamaican iguana to the edge of extinction, still exists. The mongoose. It's threatening the survival of the primeval reptiles even here at their last nesting grounds. The mongooses and the additional dangers of urban development, road construction, and in their wake, the deforestation for charcoal burning. All these extensive threats caused Peter Vogel to start a risky rescue attempt. He's digging out one of the 6 iguana clutches he's discovered. Altogether, there are 16 eggs to be carefully removed from their nest burrow. They're to be hatched under safe laboratory conditions. Peter Vogel will be keeping the iguanas in captivity till they reach a size at which they are no longer vulnerable to mongoose predation. This is a risky venture because nobody knows which conditions the Jamaican iguana needs to breed in captivity. Dr. Peter Vogel is using the same methods which have been proved successful in breeding other Caribbean iguanas. Each egg is placed in a box with damp soil and then put into an incubator at 30 degrees centigrade for 80 to 90 days. During this time, the eggs take up moisture from the soil, and by that their weight is doubled. Well, now that the Jamaican iguana is rediscovered, the dangers threatening this species are recognized, and a handful of young iguanas, if all goes well, are going to see the light of day in a few weeks' time. What's going to happen next?
The first and most important one is to conserve or establish viable iguana populations in protected areas. Then also we have to study the iguana scientifically. Very little research has been done on this species so far. Without this knowledge, you will be unable really to protect the species. Further, we want to establish captive breeding populations. In case anything goes wrong in the field, we would then have a stock of iguanas which can be used to release and restock certain areas. The Hellshare Hills are not only important because of the iguanas, there are many other important organisms in there, plants, animals, very unique ecosystems, and we also want to conserve these, and hopefully we can do this in the framework of a national parks program.
"11 weeks after Peter Vogel had dug out the iguana eggs in the Hellshare Hills, the first iguana babies are hatching in the laboratory. "14 of the 16 eggs have developed. The first part of the iguana rescue program has succeeded. The young iguanas are on their own from the first minute of their lives. In this phase, the hatchlings are particularly threatened by the mongoose. For tens of thousands of years, the Jamaican iguanas have never experienced any natural enemies, so their behavioral program does not contain any defending techniques against potential predators. Only when man came to Jamaica, he brought the enemies of the iguanas with him. But here in the Hope Zoo in Kingston, the young Jamaican iguanas are going to survive through their dangerous first phase of life. Differently from the adult iguanas caught on Goat Island in 1940, these animals born in captivity have no problems adapting to a life behind the wire mesh of a cage in a zoo. Now the iguanas are hatched in the lab. This must be the right time to make a controlling trip to the other 5 clutches in the Hellshare Hills. The first 2 nesting burrows Peter Vogel is inspecting are empty. No trace of the young iguanas. But then at the 3rd locality, in this burrow, Peter Vogel not only finds a living iguana, but also there are 4 empty eggshells and 12 eggs which did not develop. It remains a puzzle that in the natural environment, only a fraction of the parchment-skinned eggs have developed into baby iguanas. And because the Jamaican iguana until now has been largely neglected by modern science, the hatchlings in the Hellshare Hills are measured and weighed by Peter Vogel.
From here, measures 96 millimeter.
A ruler, a spring balance and an old sock. The minimal equipment to investigate a nearly extinct species. As billions of dollars are spent for space exploration and genetic engineering in the science metropolises of the world, natural scientists like Peter Vogel do their research in Jamaica's forests with nothing but a pencil and a spring balance. Where are the funds urgently needed to finance the research and the protection of the Jamaican iguana, and with it the survival of other endangered plant and animal species in the Hellshare Hills? If ecological reason doesn't get the upper hand in the end, and if the dry Hellshare forest is not declared a national park soon, then these pictures may not only be the first, but also the last filmed documents of the Jamaican iguana.